In 1518, a woman walked into the streets of Strasbourg and began to dance. At first, people stared, then they laughed, then they became afraid, because hours passed, and she didn't stop. By the end of the week, she was no longer alone. Dozens of people were moving through the streets. Some looked terrified, some looked empty, and no one could explain what was happening to their own bodies. Then the doctors offered a cure that may have made everything worse. This is one of history's strangest recorded medical mysteries, the town that couldn't stop dancing. Strasbourg, July 15, 18. A crowded city in the Holy Roman Empire. The streets were narrow, the summer was brutal, and food was running out. People lived close together. Disease moved quickly. Rumors moved even faster. And in a world without modern medicine, fear was part of daily life. Then, one day, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into the street. She began to dance. There was no festival, no music, no celebration. Just one woman moving in the middle of the city. At first, it may have looked strange, then uncomfortable, then disturbing, because the movement did not stop. Hour after hour, her body kept going. People began to whisper. Some thought she had lost her mind. Others thought something darker was happening. But by then, the strange movement had already begun to spread. Then the impossible part began. Other people joined her, not because they wanted to, not because there was music, but because something seemed to pull them into the same strange movement. One became several, several became dozens, and soon Strasbourg was watching an outbreak no one understood. Some dancers looked panicked, some looked completely vacant, some looked like they were begging their own bodies to stop. But the town had no answer. This is where medicine failed them. In 1518, doctors did not understand bacteria. They had no modern understanding of psychology. They did not know how panic could move through a crowd. So they searched for an explanation that fit their world. Their answer was simple. The dancers had hot blood, and if the blood was too hot, then the body needed to burn it out. The doctors had a theory, and it was terrifyingly wrong. Their solution was not rest, not silence, not isolation. Their solution was more dancing. City officials opened public halls. Musicians were brought in. Drums, pipes, and strings filled the air. The idea was to let the sickness exhaust itself. But there was one problem. They were feeding the nightmare. The city watched helplessly. Families stood in doorways. Priests prayed. Officials argued. Doctors searched their books again and again. But the same question returned every morning. Why were they still moving? The dancing had become more than a medical problem. It had become a public fear. And fear is dangerous when everyone can see it. The more people watched, the more real the panic became. Then the explanation changed. Some believed the dancers had angered St. Vitus. In medieval Europe, St. Vitus was associated with a strange dancing illness. To people at the time, this was not just medicine. It was faith, punishment, a curse. So the town changed its strategy. The music stopped. The halls were closed. The dancers were taken to a shrine. They were given red shoes, and prayers were made for the movement to end. Today, historians and doctors look at the story differently. There was no known infection that made people dance. No clear poison has ever been proven, and no single explanation can answer every detail. But one theory stands out: mass psychogenic illness, a condition where extreme stress can trigger real physical symptoms across a group of people. Not fake, not acting, real symptoms, but symptoms shaped by fear, belief, and the pressure of the crowd. In Strasbourg, the mind may not have imagined the crisis. It may have turned the crisis into movement. And Strasbourg was vulnerable. The city had seen hunger, disease, poverty, religious fear. People were already living close to the edge. So when one woman began moving in the street, the town did not just see a dancer. It saw a warning, a sign, a threat. The fear may have spread faster than the movement itself. Still, the mystery is not closed. Some theories mention poisoned grain. Others point to religious hysteria. Some historians believe the story may have grown larger as it was retold. That is what makes the dancing plague so powerful. It sits between medicine and legend, between history and fear, between what the body does and what the mind believes. The dancing plague is not just a strange story from the past. It shows something uncomfortable about humans. Fear can spread, belief can spread, panic can spread, and sometimes the body speaks the language of the world around it. In 1518, Strasbourg did not understand the mind, so they treated the movement like something that had to be burned out. But the more they fed it, the stronger the nightmare became. Eventually, the dancing stopped, not because the town understood it, not because the doctors solved it, but because the panic faded. The streets became quiet again. The musicians disappeared. The halls emptied. And Strasbourg was left with a story so strange that more than 500 years later, we are still asking the same question. What made them dance? This was the Medical Files.